it's very, I don't want to say it's completely new, but relatively it's very new, particularly for how like politicized it is. So that
Mhm.
makes it difficult to speak on from a medical or practitioner perspective, right? Because when I'm talking to people about this, uh, where are they coming from this? What do they know about it? How do they feel about it? How does their religion or their society uh, change the way that they approach this, or what kind of lens does it provide for them to look at this? Um,
Right. That's
from
interesting. You bring that up
Yeah,
there. Sorry to interrupt. My next question was going to be: is this in the early stages, where it's still very rough and ugly, but it might be refined in the future, like what we saw with the early adopters of hair plugs, for instance, when people are
yeah,
like bleeding from their forehead because they're getting hair plugs too early before
right,
the
right,
technology
right.
was refined.
Yeah. I think it's very new. Um, well, trans people aren't new, but how we approach
Right.
this and what we're doing about it is new. Um,
I wonder about that too, man. I like because the conception of trans identity that we have today might be different than what we saw in Bible times or like 100 years
oh,
ago.
sure, like, but I don't even think they did discuss that in the Bible at all, right? Like that wasn't a
Well,
concern
they're
of theirs.
I don't know, like, they were cross-dressing. I don't remember if
Right, but
cross-dressing was mentioned in the Bible.
that's a different thing,
Yeah.
right? So I think even when it comes, and there are debates about this, right? There's so many different schools of thought on how to
Yeah.
interpret the Bible, right?
Well,
Within
I mentioned
Judaism,
that
there's many
just
different
trying to.
interpretations as well of the whole, homosexuality and all that. What does that mean? Was that just
Well, I don't necessarily
for
mean from, like, a.
Israelites? They weren't supposed to practice that because those are practices that the cultures around them were doing, and they wanted to distinguish themselves from that, right? So it's kind of an identity marker. Um, I've heard that. Is it, they're trying to um, they're trying to dissuade people from like pedophilic behaviors.
Right.
I've heard that one too. It's all on how it's translated and
Mm.
which section are we talking about? And there's all kinds of debates there, but I would say that they just did not think of things the same way that we did now. So I think that that's a very outdated way to look at things. So if people were forming their opinions on a very new topic based on things that are happening, 2 to 3,000 years ago, and how they viewed things, um, I don't think it's as helpful as they might think. So,
Right. I mentioned the Bible just to not from, like, the religious perspective, just as far back as I can think. I'm asking
mhm.
ChatGPT right now, ancient India, we see ancient Mesopotamia circa 3000 BCE. Goddess Inanna's cult included priests and priestesses known as
Mhm.
Gala or Gaia, some of whom are said to have lived as women and performed roles typically associated with women, regardless of their assigned sex at birth. Ancient Egypt, gender variant deities. Ancient Greece and Rome, Hydra of India, eunuchs. Okay, so eunuchs is kind of a whole nother category. Two spirit, right? The two-spirit people of indigenous North American cultures. So there's like we talk about it like cross-dressing, but maybe that's like all they had available at the time. You know what I mean? Like all they could do was to dress physically from the outside
Right.
to portray the
But
part that they wanted to portray.
I think from the examples that you gave, and that's not an exhaustive list by any means,
No, there's
but
more on here too. I just
yeah,
stopped reading.
exactly. But and I don't even think we could speak on all of that. But I think the general takeaway here is that there are so many different expressions of gender, sexuality throughout all these cultures and throughout time, right? A lot of these like polytheistic um, cultures, like a lot of the gods represent humans too, right? So I think they're speaking on the human experience a little bit more, right? So as
Right.
opposed to like the Abrahamic God, which is very much not human and just interacting with humans,
Right.
right?
Apparently, Joan of Arc was accused of cross-dressing as part of the charges against her during her trials.
Right, but like
Right.
that was a function of that time, right? But
Yeah.
in other places, for a show, let's say I could go up for theater and I could cross dress or whatever, and that was fine,
Right. It's
right?
context dependent. Yeah.
It
Yeah.
so I all of it's context dependent. It's all relativistic. Um,
Mhm.
it's such a broad thing.
And so
I'm
like
not
the
no way a
culture,
historian on this, but I just yeah,
right.
rattling off some stuff.
I mean, I think what I'm saying politically with this is that the the conservatives will say that it's not context, but like we shouldn't just let people do everything that they want to do all the time, or the world would be chaos. And so there's just an aversion to anything that sounds like that coming from the right in this regard. Does that
Right.
sound right to you?
Well, to me, that's a like miscategorization,
Hmm.
right? Because when you phrase things, not when you, sorry, I should say it, but particularly the right when they phrase it like that, um, it's
Like I
it
said,
really
I'm
let
doing devil's advocate all
no
throughout
no
this whole
no no,
thing.
you're totally fine. I just don't want to be like accusational or anything.
Yeah, I
But
know what
just
you're saying.
things that I hear too. When people use that kind of language, it sounds more like, oh, people are just choosing to be wild and they're trying to be,
Right.
deviant, right? And they're trying to be bold and they just want to upset things and they just want to sin, whatever they say, right?
And they also
But
get grossed out by it too. There's a
oh yeah,
visceral, dude, insula cortex. Oh, that's a powerful cortex. That's a powerful part of the brain, and that triggers in them. And they just get super grossed out by anything that's like outside of the norm, whatever the norm
right.
is. Yeah.
Well, I guess this is relevant to that. So when it comes to trans stuff, because that seems to be like right now, that's the big issue. The past like 10 years seems to be the big issue on the right. But before that, homosexuality was the thing that was demonized,
Right,
right?
because that's
And
against the quote unquote norm
right.
or
So
biology or
so
whatever.
exactly right. So anything that's against the norm is blamed for the problems
Right.
in the world, right? So they tend to associate um, sexual issues, right, and any deviations from the sexual hegemony, let's say, right, are really they bring up that visceral feeling you described,
Mhm.
right? Like it goes to that like lizard brain
If
there.
you watch
And
people, not to interrupt, but
no,
sometimes they'll do the thing where they do this, like they'll raise their nose a little bit.
right,
That's an ancient genetic instinct that's connected to the insular cortex to plug the nose when an offending smell arises, and that facial expression has persisted through time. And people will talk about this and they'll be like, I don't know. You see what I mean? Like that's crazy how
right. I always thought that was
deep
like a
set that
French
is.
thing. It was
Sorry.
where they
Oh, maybe it's that too. That's interesting. Maybe like certain cultures have that
right.
stronger than others. Yeah. But yeah,
So
I've
maybe
noticed that when I talk about that with like I talk with a lot of ignorant people, to put it
sure.
nicely, and I see that facial expression in them. So that's I think that's what we're up against. Like we're up against a large part of this that's like genetic repulsion to a lot of these issues that we're talking about, versus compassion and empathy, and both of these being taken to extremes. You know.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think that it's not everyone is doing this in a nefarious way, but I think a lot of times it's easy to take the hardest thing to accept or the strangest thing or the thing that's most visceral, and it's easy to use that experience as a tool, right, to further an agenda. So
Right.
so when
Everybody's
I
got
say
an
that, it's
agenda.
like right. Well, it's easy to I could lump every problem in the world on the pro-trans movement,
Right.
right? Because they're the liberal, atheist, unreasonable,
Even that,
right?
the
Or
pro-trans
whatever they want to
movement.
label on them, right? So they
Right.
just lump it in and they take the thing that sells the most because that is a very easy thing to sell because it causes that visceral reaction
Right.
to many people, right? So I I'm very skeptical of how the right views trans issues because I think to them they don't actually care about the human side of trans people. I think it's mostly just it is atypical and it is abnormal, and it is a very easy thing to blame the world's problems on,
Oh yeah.
right?
The
And
way
I,
that
I
you put
think
it, like
that's what we're responding to
pro-trans.
mainly. So
Yeah.
they're not all like that, I'm sure, but that's just what I've seen a lot with that.
Absolutely, man. I mean, the way that you put it, like pro-trans movement, like that's or the trans rights, trans identity, right? Like we're
Yeah,
already reifying these concepts as like actual concepts when it's really not that big of a deal. The cases that we're seeing are few and far between, but or like the problematic cases that we're seeing are few and far between. But
yeah,
we talked about this for man, we talked about this for like 6 hours before. That's crazy. Which not to get into this, but like I just want to point out that these conversations can be had from a nuanced, mature perspective
yeah,
for extended for hours if you're really dedicated to it, or you can default to a cognitive dissonance and like default to one-sided thinking and then just like butt heads and we never get anywhere. So this is a big part of what I'm
exactly.
trying to channel is try to bring this nuance into play.
Oh yeah, no, and I think that's great. The one caution I have is when it comes to issues of identity and all that. I mean, identity may be one of the few things we have in this world, right? The way that we, conceptualize
Mhm.
ourselves, how we view ourselves and express ourselves, right? Um, I think we don't always have control over that, but I think your experience as a human being is very much influenced by that. And
Absolutely.
if someone has the experience of a trans person, um, I think telling them, well, you're really not that way or whatever. I That's very like
That's
counterproductive and
ableist.
harmful. And a little humility, I think, would go a long way. So,
Yeah.
right? Who are we to tell someone that they're wrong about something, right? I mean, how could we know that we're right about something, especially when it's their identity? And there's there's some consequences of people not um, honoring the authentic selves, right? That are
Yeah.
very, very dire. And I think we have to look at what's more important.
I was gonna say it's very ableist. It's more ignorant than anything. It's just not willing to, well, indeed, ignore. Like the root word there, ignoring. It's ignoring other people's perspectives, ignoring how other people can view the world.
Right. And that's we kind of touched on this earlier, but as someone who's coming from this from a like a therapeutic angle, right? I'm not here to fix people's problems, right? Even conceptualizing it like that, I don't find it very helpful. And it just feels wrong,
Yeah.
right?
So this is
I
where I
want
would say,
Yeah,
or
like
go ahead.
no, I want to help people, maybe either find their authentic self or, to work through it and work with it, to come out on the other side with, you know, a better outlook and a better experience and better self concept and all that.
Right.
And that's going to come from them. What is it that they want? What is it that they feel? Who do they feel that they truly are? Who do they want to be? Uh, what are things that they could do to have those things, right?
Right.
Or to
Right.
accept themselves better? Or do they need to take action to get through where they want to be? So I would like to help people to do that. So whenever I see people not acting through that, it's very contrary to how I view the world and how I view human interactions,
Right. I
right?
mean, so an argument could be made for like the fixing you. Like some could say that that would be the ultimate fixing. Like I'm taking it upon me to physically fix your physical body so that you feel better. It's not even like the therapist telling the person how to think. It's the therapist physically hands on going into and fixing the person's body. So that could be seen as kind of a that's not really like the ultimate savior thing because then the patient doesn't come back anymore. Like it's already done. But do you see what I'm getting at? Like there are ways to look
Kind
at
of.
like fixing, like it's not my job to fix you. That could be seen as fixing them. Maybe I just thought about this. I haven't thought this out yet.
Right, right, right. I mean, like the way that I view helping people. Um, I'm gonna help someone by being there with them. I could give them some perspective, perhaps, but I'm not there
Right.
to transplant my idea about who I think they should be or whatever, or how they should
Right.
live
So
their
it's
lives
just like
onto
it's
them.
affirming. Yeah.
Right. So that's more where I'm coming from. But of course, I hope to help them, right? And I hope there's a transformation. If I could have a hand in that, that's awesome. Like, really cool. I mean, if I didn't
Right.
believe that, why would I be a therapist, right? If I didn't think I could affect
Well, there's
change.
different ways. Yeah. And there's
You know.
different ways to be a therapist. But so,
Oh yeah.
like, it's interesting you use the word transformation, though. So, when I look at folks like Ian McGilchrist, John Vervaeke, and the philosophical psychologists, also Jordan Peterson, the and I really don't like to reference him, but he does go
Yeah. I
into
was
some depth.
like, we could have a whole
Yeah, lots of
debate
problems.
there.
I have a lot of problems with the way he's
Yeah.
doing everything he's doing all the time. But he more so for Reiki and the folks that are looking into like secular versions of transcendence and what it means to grow as a person. When we talk about transformation, I'm like, again, I'm trying not to take sides on this. There's a personal growth side of transformation, and there's physical appearance side of transformation, I guess you could say. The way that I've kind of been writing this out is that the personal growth would come first, and very often when goes through all that growth, and I mean the growth that consists of all of the bases. So you have like all the existential givens covered, which you can never truly cover because they're existential givens. So that's
Right.
already
Because you're
fraught.
alive.
But because you're alive, yes. So their conception on how they deal with death, their meaning in life, death anxiety. I mean, meaning and purpose, identity, as well as isolation, freedom, overwhelm, like the way Jean-Paul Sartre talked about it, like
Oh
choice
yeah.
paralysis and FOMO and all that. Once you have all those worked out, and your spiritual beliefs and like who you want to be, your goals, you have the life coaching, you have the whole, all your framework set up like that. Once all those have been taken care of, I imagine that in most cases the sexual identity won't be as much of a problem. But that's an assumption. There could be exceptions to that.
Right. But like that's to view things like on a linear timeline, so to speak.
Well, so
Right.
not so much linear. I'm thinking more like priority based. But I mean, again, this is incredibly subjective because people's sexual identity it's more important to some people than it is to others, right?
Well, exactly. Like my sexual identity is not as important to me because it's the norm, right?
Right.
It's in accordance with what society expects from someone, with my biology, let's say, right? And I might be, I mean, I know I have a lot of privileges, right? So I'm in a dominant position in many cases. Um, and I don't have to think about these things because it's not being called into question very often, right?
Right.
Like it if well, I'll give you an example from the other day. I like sparkly things, so I had my sparkly Crocs on
Oh,
at
you show
work.
me your Crocs. Yeah.
Yeah, you saw. So like they're really sparkly.
Mhm.
Um, so I wore them to work, and this really like tough, like firefighter, police officer type guy, uh, was like making passes on me being feminine, and it was he's an older guy, so I understand that there's a generational divide with that, right? He had a very narrow concept of what it
Mhm.
means to be manly, But I just said to him kind of as a joke. I'm like, well, I mean, like, I have a wife. I lift more weights than you. Like, my beard is better. Like,
Right.
uh, whatever. I'd probably eat more steak or whatever. So it was just like, in every way, I was more, masculine as we tend to identify it. But because I had
Right.
the sparkly shoes, he was really latched onto that, right? Because he saw that as feminine, and
Mm.
you know, it to me it was just silly. So I was having fun with that, but it got me thinking. Like
It's
that's
against
the
the
work
norm.
I really have to deal with as far as my identity, gender wise, right?
Right.
Um, as far as like an external conflict. Um, so I don't really have to think
Yeah,
about it
people
too
weren't
much.
addressed to, like when I was in my youth,
Right.
or I guess like 20, around 2021, I wasn't like into it, but I mean, I had a few friends that had dresses, and one of them gave me one of them, and I wore some a few days, and it was
Right.
like summer, and it feels amazing, especially as a man, to wear a skirt. I don't go into detail, but it's quite freeing.
Yeah. I mean, you could get a kilt, right? I mean, that's a
Oh yeah,
man's
it's
skirt,
all yeah,
right? But I mean, what? I don't know the difference,
yeah.
right?
I mean, I think the argument coming from the right, or just the people that are opposed to this, is that that wouldn't be as high up on the priority list, or it would be like they want to see your accolades and your achievements first before they see your gender, I
Right,
guess. And the
but I
same
don't
is
think
true for
that's actually.
disorders too.
I don't think I actually believe that though, because what we know from just bigotry in general, people will latch on to what they identify as your identity, and they will see that
Right,
before they look at your accolades, right? Um, and this is just bigotry in general, right? Like uh, a man in power might see a woman, and um, I guess he would have, let's say he had power over her because it was her boss or something like that, um, right? He might not look at her as favorably as her male counterpart, right?
right,
Even if they have the same accolades, right? And that's a basic example, but that's just human nature, it seems,
right.
right?
I mean, I've noticed this, and like I'm trying to stay separate from it. I really don't have opinions either way. I just want to respect people and I want to help people and come from a place of
Right.
empathy and kindness.
I don't think we should tell people what they should or should not do, right? To assume that something is a problem, first of all, and then to
Right,
assume that we know better than they do,
right.
right? So yeah, of course there are therapists who engage in conversion practices, right, which are obviously horrible,
What
right?
is that?
So conversion therapy is traditionally it was used for homosexuality. Um,
Oh, shit.
is
I know what you're
where they'd
talking about.
send them
Okay.
to camps and they would like shame
Yeah,
people and like all kinds of stuff, right? Like that's
there are lots of suicides
explicitly
from
like
that.
outlawed,
Yeah.
right? Because it doesn't do any good.
Well, it still exists, right? There's still cases of people committing
Oh,
suicide in these camps today. Yeah.
oh my God, it's terrible, but it goes against all like ethics
Yes.
in the
Yeah.
field,
It's
right?
not
But
prescribed anymore.
but
Yeah. Yes.
right. But my point is, there are still therapists or psychologists or religious leaders, right, who use these techniques, right? So I could say the same thing about um, trans issues, right? Uh, Someone comes into therapy and they want to know what to do next, right? Um, it's very much not the job of the therapist to tell someone, oh, you need to get this procedure done and all that stuff too. Now,
Yeah.
you could probably come up with a few examples of that happening, but that is
Well,
something that's not part, right, of the profession, right? That's
right.
something that's very antithetical to what we do. And that goes back to what I was saying before, like we are not here to fix people's problems, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like so what do they want to do? And
Well, so
maybe
we're giving you the tools to fix yourself, and maybe I think the argument is that this tool is a little bit too strong. It's a little too tempting for people to, you know
well
what I mean?
well,
Like,
and there's an argument for that, I'm sure. But what is it that someone wants to do? Like, what journey do you want to go on? What process do
they
you need
love,
to
yeah.
undergo to get to where you believe you want to go? Right?
That's where,
And
like,
and
the
and
life coaching comes first, I think, because people don't really know who they are. I mean, I didn't know who I was and what I wanted to do with my life until I was in my 30s, man. Like, this is the thing. I mean, I knew my sexual identity pretty early on, but for lots of people, that can change as you age as well. And so making this legal for children at the age of 15 to do, I think is very problematic. But, I
well,
pulled up the, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was saying, like there are debates as to what age this and that, what's the process you go through, um,
Right. Or
and
even
to
like,
come to go to full
15's
like
extreme, but like 20, I mean, even 20 or 21, like you shouldn't be drinking at 21 either, like making those kinds of decisions. I mean, a lot of
right,
people
right,
can
but
handle it, a lot of people can't, is what I mean.
yeah, but I think the problem here is that you can't fully safety proof life,
Right.
right?
Well, so the
There,
argument would be that like we should try not to create more problems than, I mean, it's, yeah, there's the nerfing the edges on reality thing, but there's also there's accommodation that can be taken too far. And I think that this is a good
but for you to
example.
assume that it's being taken too far, right? Like
Yeah.
this is an assumption that you're making, right? But
Yeah.
if the vast
Oh, I
majority of
should
people
clarify,
who
in
transition
most
don't
cases.
want to transition back, right?
Right.
Is
I
that
meant,
really
in like in most cases, that's probably the case. There have to be exceptions with these things, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. But, so we have to look at what's the best, overall solution, right?
Right.
And also, where does this person want to go, right? Like, what do they want? Again, it comes down to that. Ultimately, people have to make choices about their own lives, and some of them are risky, but this is what life is made of, right? I mean, that risky choice may be infinitely safer, right, than
Because you
choosing
might harm yourself.
to not honor your authentic self,
Or
right?
it
I
will
mean,
be that you would harm yourself later on if you didn't get the procedure done.
right, or you just live an entirely terrible life, right?
Right.
I mean, it's
Gender
it's
affirming,
hard
that's
for
why
us
it's called
to
gender
fully
affirming. Yeah.
understand that experience because it is so foreign,
Right.
right? It's hard to imagine that. And again, like I know for me, it's very hard to imagine because like everything seems pretty set up as far as my sexuality and gender
Yeah.
and all that stuff, right? I feel very like conforming, and I'm
Cis.
okay with that. But just to a degree, right, or have this privilege that I don't have to think about it too much.
Right. That's a
But
really good point, man. Yeah. I
yeah,
hadn't thought about that.
you
And
know,
the like when
but
you're coming from the like cis people don't get it, I guess would be the argument.
well, and
Cis.
not saying that we can't get it at all, but I'm not gonna tell people that there's a better way and you should wait until you're this age and all
Right,
that,
right.
right?
I think there is an argument for that, that there very often is probably a better way, but also there's argument for people actually needing these procedures.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
I think the majority of the cases that it is being it's probably being it's not that the psychologists are pushing this too far or the surgeons. I think it's just the zeitgeist, man. It's the talk of the town. And I'm thinking we're gonna see a trend where this is popular right now, and the next decade there'll be another thing that's popular, and
Well,
that's really I mean,
maybe.
that's what we've seen in the past. Like, we've seen ADHD in the '90s, we saw autism, and we've seen many people, claiming disorders and self-diagnosing every decade for the past, like, I don't know, 70 years or so. Although it's gotten a little worse since the internet, of course, but I
Right,
think that's
but
the tragedy, unfortunately, that we get so caught up in tradition and social
right,
comparison as well. Like we see it with teenage
right.
girls, and this in particular is more popular with 14-year-old teenage girls by a factor of it's like 1 in 4, I think. Yeah, it's like yeah, one or a ratio of 1 to 4 girls to boys that are questioning these things.
Right, right. But I mean, questioning things and full
Yeah, well, so
reassignment sort of
yeah,
like
there's a
there's
process. Yeah,
there's a process and everyone has a different experience of that, right?
right. I pulled up the actual because we talked about this last time too. I asked ChatGPT what's the actual from the DSM-5 and also like updated recommendations from the APA. What is the process for this? So before a patient undergoes gender transition surgery, therapists and healthcare providers conduct a thorough evaluation. Da 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 da. So they go through personal history and identity. How do you currently identify with your gender? When did you first realize that your gender identity didn't align with your assigned sex at birth? Can you describe your journey in discovering and accepting your gender identity? So that one's really complicated. Have you consistently identified with your current gender identity over time? That's a very important question. How do you feel about your body and your physical appearance in relation to your gender identity? That one's very subjective and can change over time. Mental and emotional health. Have you experienced any mental health issues such as depression, anxiety? That one's also very complicated, and we don't exactly know how to think about that. I think in regards to gender expression, how have these issues been addressed or treated in the past? Are you currently seeing a health professional? You cope with stress and emotional challenges? Have you thought of self-harm or suicide? And then support is asking about support systems. You have family and friends. You have a support group. How has your loved one responded to your gender identity and transition plans? That's a good question. Are you comfortable discussing your transition with those close to you? What kind of support do you feel you need after your transition? That's an interesting question. And then it asks medical history and physical health, understanding of the procedure and expectations. What's your reasons for wanting the surgery? That one's going to be a really tricky question. What are your expectations for the outcome? That's a really good question. Do you understand the risks and potential complications associated with the surgery? That one's extremely problematic because we don't know just yet. Are you aware of the recovery process and the time it takes to heal? That's also really problematic and subjective. Have you researched the procedure and consulted with a qualified surgeon? Lifestyle and practical considerations. You might hear my central language processing coming in actually the way I'm kind of fumbling over my words, so I'll try to clear up here.
No, I didn't notice.
Good.
So
How will you
that's
manage your
good
daily
for you.
life?
You nice job.
Yeah, it's because I took Benadryl last night, man. I'm telling you, like when my sleep gets messed up, that's when the CLPD starts doing this thing. Not an excuse though, and I don't identify with that as a label. But
I don't know. It sounded like it for a sec. Is that gonna ruin
see,
your
that's
life
why
now?
it's so complicated. Like I'm using it as a placeholder because I believe in the future we'll have a better way of describing this, but just it's a shortcut for me to say CLPD or
Well,
central
maybe
language
a lot of
processing
times it is.
disorder.
Yeah, but maybe a
Sorry,
lot of people do that too. I
I hope
bet
so.
you.
I'm hoping
Yeah,
that's the case.
I think more people just use it as like this is just the tools that I have available to me, and I'm going to use those tools.
I think when you have the bigger history perspective, or when you studied like human history and evolution, and like predictions of the future and all that, then it gives you a better perspective on how to think about those labels.
Right,
But
right. But
yeah,
like as a professional, like that's what you could help people do,
exactly. Yeah,
and we
that's
should
very
do
much
that.
the job of the therapist
I
too.
totally agree. But I don't think the label itself is inherently going to be the worst thing. You know,
Right.
for people
It's
to
incredibly
adopt.
bewitching. Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly bewitching and misleading for some people, and then other people are like, "Oh, wait, that's a label," and a lot of times that comes from therapy for them to
Right.
recognize that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But to
yeah,
go back to the your list before, um, you were like reading off is like a questionnaire essentially, right?
yeah.
And
There's a little
and
bit more to it, but yeah,
right, but what I was thinking about as I was listening is this questionnaire is directed towards the person who is at that time looking at
right,
right the
right,
surgical option, but I think that it gets lost the process that occurs over many years to get to that
right,
point, right? It's not just like a questionnaire and then we flip. And this is something that
right.
I learned about, fairly the past year, right? About like the progressive stages where, as you notice that there's a incongruency, right, between the assigned sex and your gender expression, right? Um,
Yeah,
we start to notice that you take progressive steps to see what the solution is, right? Because
right,
it's possible, and I think for many people that maybe just like using different pronouns and wearing different clothing, that might fix everything, right? And I think a lot of people like that. That's fine. And again, this isn't like a prescriptive, uh, you know, detailed idea of what everyone goes through, but it just gives you an example of like it's not just you're normal and you're getting surgery to change your life around, right?
right.
It's very much
There's a
likened to
procedure.
the right to the psychosocial development process as a teenager, right? You're trying to figure out who you are separate from your parents, let's say, and a big part of that is to you know reject your parents and to adopt friendships, right? And you're
Right,
using that external mirror, right, of a friendship to help you form your identity, right? And then from there you try on different hats, so to speak, and you see which ones fit, right? And that's the process you uh, engage with in order to
and then
figure out who you are,
right,
right? So I think from what I understand, right, the process in you know gender affirming care and you know however else we call that, um, I think it is progressive. I think you know you try different things. You spend a long time doing this. You have therapy, right? You talk through things. You work with your family ideally, right? You get the whole community and system in place,
right,
um,
right.
and it's not just I'm just gonna just do this on a whim, right? it's not just like this.
It's over years, ideally.
Yeah,
I
it
mean,
should be. It should be over a long period of time. And again, how long that takes, I
but if
mean,
they're
there.
if they're considering suicide, like that's where the therapist would rush, though, I would think, or the professionals would rush, or whatever you want to call them.
Right, and maybe
I
there's
mean,
something else at play there. I don't want to speak for people and say this is their experience, right?
right.
But and
Yeah,
I think
you
yeah,
very much changed my thinking on this. I appreciate you expressing that because I was under that impression that it was a much shorter process. But this, so the steps and the trying on of different hats, I think that's a good metaphor.
right,
The the phenomenologist would probably say that because, and the existential psychotherapist, I guess, would say that those hats might be different later on in life. So even if it is a
right,
whole year that this person, or 2 years that they're going through this at the age of 15 or at the age of 25, even, the brain doesn't just cap off at 25. Like the brain always has neuroplasticity. It's kind of just on like a descent, but it can also change based on various factors. And the personality can change too. And that's a big part about bipolar personality disorder and all that,
right,
is that personality is meant to be malleable. And I have other questions we can get on that as well. I think that that's that's where it can get. Uh, that's very subjective, and it's hard to say what's right for a person given the conception of who they are at that time in their life,
right,
and they might be a different person later on. And so we're affirming how they feel now, but they might feel very differently later. And I think that's what we might have seen with the person that is they're trying to sue. Was it Harvard? I don't want to say it. Suing a very popular university
right.
for doing this transition surgery and then regretting it later. They said they were persuaded by the psychologist, or just I don't think that, like, the way they talk about it was not they were like directly persuaded. Like it's not that the therapist was trying to be like, oh, this is the thing to do for you. I know exactly what's right for you. It's more like they were going by the book. They were going by this procedure, step by step thing, and they it sounded good to them the whole time until it was too late and they made the mistake at the end, and then they regretted it later.
Sure, sure. But here's the problem though. The
Again,
media
rare
will take a
cases.
story like that and they'll be
Rare
like,
case.
"Look, you see, this is right." And I've seen straight up lies about the
Yeah.
statistics of how many people regret it and want to reverse the surgery and all that too. Um,
It's
and because
sensationalism.
it's right, well, it's because it's the normal. Like these people are just freaks. They could just say whatever they want, and they get the media gets away with it, right?
Yeah.
And the right wing media is full of this. There's so many propaganda
Mhm.
films. It's not even funny,
Yeah.
right?
The
It's
film, what is it? What is a woman or whatever? Yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah,
said
because
I watched it. You said that was from what
what's
was
from
the
Matt
company that
Walsh, and like he's
yeah.
known to be someone who does not have anyone's interest at heart except for uh
Well, there's a company that he works for, not a company, but like a think tank or whatever, that
yeah.
are all
I
about
thought
that.
it's
And
is it not the Daily Wire?
yeah, Daily, that's what it is.
Okay, well
So this is what I'm saying.
that's your
This
hero's
is just to let
company.
you know, like, this is how separated I am from this world. I don't even know that, like, I mean, I know who Daily Wire is. I never even thought about that. I watched the movie and it made some pretty good points, but also like there's extreme bias in it. And they're all like at the very end, they're like, "What is a woman? An adult human female." And it's like total trad wife
Well,
in this
right,
corner,
but
just
it's
like
like
mixing up cookie batter. It's an adult human female. It's like, okay, guys, we got it. You made
right,
your
right,
point, but
right. But like imagine you had just no education in this, right? And you see something like that.
yeah, it just
Like
reinforces, and it makes people. It's separating the biases. Yeah, it's incredibly toxic and
right, right. And
profitable.
like
Very
it
profitable.
well, again, it's very profitable and they're trying to sell these
Yeah.
ideas
But the
to
argument
people.
would be like one case is too many, and I'm still torn between that. Like one death is too many when we think about like utilitarianism comes into play here versus deontology and all that. And I mean, I don't know. Like I don't want people to have messed up genitalia because of the misunderstandings. Again, I think we
Right,
have a problem of early adoption where this
right,
could
right.
be
But I
better.
would argue too, if someone has like, let's say the quote unquote wrong genitalia, the genitalia is messed up, like from the get go, right?
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. Maybe this thing, has negative consequences, but again, the utilitarian side of it is like, okay, but how bad are those versus like, you know, the positive impact we could have on people,
Yeah, and the
and
suicides or the
exactly, and
self-harm.
there's no like absolute answer there, But I think what this points to is the fact that if we're going to allow people, right, to have these questions, right, and explore their authentic selves, I think we should set up the best society that allows them to make the most informed decision about what they want to do, right? So if we could give people just better support in general, if we could support our children better, right? And we could get rid of like all this negative media that's just bullshit and very harmful.
Mhm.
If we could get rid of that, we could then allow people to have more informed decisions, and I think we'll have fewer regrets than we have now, right? And I
Here's
think we'll
hoping, yeah.
save lives. And so that's my argument, right? Um,
Yeah.
and just the whole transition out again, it's not that many people percentage wise, but it takes up a disproportionate amount of headspace.
Right.
And
Well, I mean, I think that there are more people that are considering this than we might realize. Like, I have a lot of
right,
friends that have gone through these procedures or are considering top surgery at least. They're currently on hormone therapy, which
right,
again, we don't know the long-term consequences of that. Hormone chemistry is also a very delicate thing. You can look at Robert Sapolsky's lectures on this.
sure,
Altering our hormone chemistry is very risky, and it's very easy to think that it's okay to do that, and also think that it's okay to like do hormone blockers to allow children to have time to decide. I mean, talk about like intervening on natural human biology, like the natural phases of adulthood and like growing into yourself. I'm trying not to sound preachy, but that seems like we're really like when we talk about science has it all figured out and we got it, we'll take it from here. We're gonna intervene and put these chemical blockers on the person to give them a more like what we think the human experience should be like, because we know exactly how to do it. You know what I'm saying? Like it's
well,
very
yeah,
hubristic. It's hubristic science, I guess you would say.
but it's also, I don't know if it's a good policy to presuppose that the natural way is the best way.
Exactly. The reality is red in tooth and claw. And I write about this as well. We should be
Yeah,
intervening. We should. That's what we do with society. That is civilization. That is agriculture. That is the girdling of the earth process, whether we want to call it controlling of the earth or gently using and working with the earth and using its resources.
right,
There are right ways to do it and wrong ways to do it. And I mean, we're still figuring that out too. We're still putting pollution in the air. You know,
right. But like those examples would also include gender affirming care.
exactly. But I think that's so like we're so early to that. It's hubristic too, and I think that like the way Daniel Schmachtenberger, the ecologist and social philosopher, talks about it. He talks about like the multipolar trap, where we have lots of different nodes where we're kind of extremely overconfident in the way that we're taking on resources from the earth, and it's physically impossible. Like brain wise, we can't predict to the future all of the second and third and fourth order consequences of what we're going to
Right,
do, because there's just too many poles and yeah, too many options and possible consequences. And that's why I'm just like my main message for now, at least the way that I'm understanding it, is just really be careful and really take your time and try to look at all the angles and all that.
yeah,
Yeah. So this is a fun question. I asked you a little bit about this before when we talked before, concerning body integrity dysphoria. So there's a little bit of a philosophical argument here. Um, when people desire to have a limb amputated, it's like the sort of phantom limb syndrome where you feel like a limb should be there,
right,
you feel like a limb shouldn't be there. Crazy story, man. Like not story, but like when I was in high school and middle school, I had that, and or at least I was experiencing that, and
mhm,
I felt like this section of my pinky should be removed of all things. I think it's because I have Poland syndrome, where I don't
right,
have a pectoral muscle on this side of my body, and my left arm is shorter than my right arm. There's probably some kind of psychological thing there. So I would walk around through high school like this with my pinky curled in.
hmm,
Very strange, very, very strange. So if I wanted to have that operated on, I can't do that under current psychological law, under uh, legislation in the United States, and there's no uh, there's no BID affirming care for me in that regard. There's no body integrity dysphoria care, but there is gender dysphoria care, but not body integrity dysphoria care. Um,
hmm,
I forget what you said about that, man. I'm sorry. I remember you made a good point, but how do you how do you see that now?
yeah. I mean, I think it just ties into identity, right? Um,
Right.
You know, there's probably like a dosage effect here,
Well,
I
I was
guess
like
is the way to put it.
17, 18 when I was thinking about that.
Right, 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 right. No, but I mean more like what what impact does this have on your life, right? And it's not to minimize
Well,
or
yeah, it
maximize,
would have like it would have
you
messed
know,
up my guitar playing because the way I play guitar is by using my pinky to, well, certain techniques I use for guitar is to like keep the pinky on the bridge of the strings and use that as like a structure to work with. Same with goujing when I play goujing.
right,
And if I'd had that affirmed, I would have regretted it later. But I really felt that that was the right thing to do then. And it would have been those years, like it would have been all through middle school and high school, a 7 year period where I was feeling that way. Although it wasn't that bad. Like there were periods where it fluctuated, but you get what I mean.
right. Yeah. Yeah, it just depends on how serious that is. Um, and how
Well, so
much it
that now just
affects
to
your overall life.
right,
I
right.
mean, why? Because I see what you're saying. You know, having something that you can't necessarily change back, and something that you could regret. You know, should you do that thing, right? Or should you be allowed to do that thing? I think is what you're asking.
Yeah, it's not so much the allow, it's like, are we sure that we ought to have these services in play right now, given the technology that we have and the wisdom, specifically the wisdom that we have as a species? I feel we're very much lacking in wisdom. We certainly don't teach that in school.
Right.
That's a point for Reiki Mix as well, by the way. He says he asks his students, "Where do you go for information?" And they hold up their phones or a dictionary. And he says, "Where do you go for knowledge?" And they say, "The university or my professor." And then he says, "Where do you go for wisdom?" And he's met with silence.
Well, yeah, but like that's just that example. It's almost like Jesus's parables, right? They're kind of set up that way, right?
Yeah.
For effect. But
Well,
you know,
it's
I could
yeah,
easily see people going, "Oh, well, I'll go to my priest. I'll go to this guru. I'll go to my grandfather. He's really wise.
well,
I'll go to
so
my."
that's specifically what we're not doing now because we're in postmodernism. We can't go to our priests anymore. Saying this very generally, for the secular community that's growing so progressively.
Right, right. But the
So they
answer is
turn
not
to
to
the
blame
therapist.
postmodernism. The answer is to have better authority figures and people you could trust, and you know what I mean, and
Exactly.
setting up better secular communities, right? So
Yeah.
that's you know that's where I'm going there. Um,
We don't have the church, but we do have groups, uh, secular churches. But yeah, we're
and that's
still
cool
figuring
if
that out
people
too.
want the like if you want a church format, like and but you're secular or atheist or non-theist, um, that's cool. You can go to that. Like I don't like that format at all. Um,
Right.
right, that's not me. But I have so many good friends, such a good support system. I have so many interests, and like so I'm not lacking any of those things. So you know, so I wouldn't use that. But some people they love that. Some people have such great memories of being in church, but they just don't believe in a higher power, let's say, and they want to go to their universalist church or whatever. Um,
Right. Right.
yeah,
I
you know,
think
so
where we saw like people going to the priests, like you mentioned, they would go to the priest for advice in the past. Now we're going to the professor or we're going to the therapist for advice. And then we get the whole ultimate rescuer complex developing in both of those
right,
cases.
but I think the idea of with secularism in general is right. Like we could build a better world based on not necessarily hard science, but on ideas that are vetted in a better way than God just dictated them to you,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
So that's my argument for secularism, um, where it's like I would rather go to a therapist, and I know I'm obviously biased, but I'd rather go to a therapist to get information than from a priest, because while a priest may have some very great training and great experiences and a good head on their shoulders and all that, I'd rather go to someone who's spent their life studying things and had peer reviewed work in
Yeah,
there and
I
you
can
know
totally get
stuff
down
like
with
that, not because I think peer review is perfect, but I think it's the best system
that. Yeah,
that we have,
it's the best we
right?
have for now.
It's best we have for now. The scientific method, I think, is the most consistent way to come to, you know, good, reliable, knowledge or facts or truth or
Yeah,
whatever.
I tend to agree. It's certainly way better than what we had in the past, and that's how I tend to side on things. The one comment to be made, I think, is that the science does not account for the existential givens, and that's where existential psychotherapy really comes into play, and has still been in contention for the past 70 odd years that it's been going around. It's honestly like, if you look at the history on this, it's been a wonderful exploration over the past year